Time to learn about the respiratory system. Learning objectives for this lesson are that you can describe the structures that compose the respiratory system, the parts, if you will, and that you can tell and describe their functions, what they do. You'll also notice that there are questions at the end of this lesson that are graded. They're part of your score, so please don't forget to do those. Your respiratory system has two jobs in your body. The first one is that it brings oxygen into the body. We've been talking about the need for oxygen for a while now. We focused on this question about why do we breathe in the last unit. We know that we really need the oxygen to combine with the food in our body to give us energy, right? We don't have energy available to us without combining food and oxygen. The second job is that you have to get rid of the carbon dioxide waste. That same process that gives us energy creates this carbon dioxide waste. And if we let that build up in our cells, it causes the cells to die. We have to get rid of it. So our lungs help with that. All right, this is the diagram that you have on your paper, and it's overlaid with several boxes. There's a box for each part that we're going to discuss. So make sure you notice which part we're discussing and identifying it on the diagram and writing in what goes in that box. We are going to start with the nasal cavity. This is the first place that air enters into your respiratory system. It has a couple jobs. It moistens the air. That means it hydrates it. It adds a little liquid to it. And it warms it up because most of the time you're breathing air that is cooler than your internal body temperature. The other thing that you've got going on in there are these lovely hairs and mucus that have a job of trapping dust and debris. You don't want dust and debris getting down into your lungs. So the good news is that you've got these hairs and sticky mucus that trap anything that you might breathe in so that it does not go down the back of your throat. Next on the list is the pharynx. Look on the left of your paper. Basically, the pharynx is just the fancy science word for the back of your throat. So it's passageway for both air and food. When you swallow something, it passes through this region. And you've got a few other things back there, your uvula, your tonsils. Your pharynx becomes what's called your trachea. So the back of your throat empties into this tube. Your trachea is also known as your windpipe. It's the tube that takes air into your lungs. It's about 12 centimeters long, and it is lined with C-shaped rings of cartilage. So if you kind of tilt your chin up and run your finger along your throat, you can feel these rigid rings of cartilage, and they're here on the diagram. They basically have the same purpose as these metal rings on your vacuum hose. Basically, it's to keep that tube from collapsing when air is going in and out of it. You don't want this tube to collapse because then you can't take air into your lungs. So that's what the cartilage is there for. It also is lined with mucus and cilia. So it's those structures' jobs are to trap dust and debris that might get in there before they wind up in your lungs. Okay, this is a camera going down into a normal trachea. So there it goes. You can see the rings of cartilage through here. There you can see the heart beating close to the trachea. And at the very bottom, right here, do you see how it splits into two branches? Right, that would be the bronchi, one leading to each lung. You'll find at the very top of your trachea, there's a little flap of tissue called the epiglottis. And this is there so that when you swallow food during the digestive process, it doesn't accidentally go into this tube. So if you accidentally get food caught in your windpipe or trachea, then that is what we call choking, which hopefully you can get out via the Heimlich maneuver. So it's there just to prevent food from going down the wrong hole. Your larynx is the airway to which your vocal cords are attached. If you've ever had laryngitis, right, that's when you've lost your voice, when this area of your windpipe is inflamed or infected. So it's just right here on this diagram. And when air passes by those little flaps of tissue, here it kind of looks like a little mouth, they vibrate and that produces sound. So again, if you put your finger on your throat and you just make a little hum or talk, you can feel that vibration happening. So that produces your voice. Now we've made it down into the lungs, which you have two of, and they're basically spongy sacs for exchanging oxygen and carbon dioxide. I know it's tempting to think of lungs as like a balloon. They just inflate and deflate, but they are not like that. They are like sponges.
Now for a spectacular biological hack. Rachel Peterson from Washington State wanted to show her kids how lungs work. So she purchased some cow lungs from her local butcher and attached a leaf blower.
Lungs just look weird. But then again, I guess they weren't designed to travel around without the rest of the cow attached.
Some people might think this looks a little bit gross to see these lungs being inflated on the table, but to me as a biologist, I think it's amazing to see how this organ really works.
When a cow breathes, it's taking in oxygen through its bronchial tubes. And it goes through the bronchial tubes and into the lungs and into these tiny, tiny little tubes called alveoli. And the purpose of the alveoli is to increase the surface area where gas exchange can take place.
We're talking up to 500 square meters of surface area within a lung. And this is to be able to transfer oxygen into the tissues and to allow CO2 or carbon dioxide to transpire out of the tissue. So surface area is really critical in the lung.
So Rachel's leaf blower replicates breathing on a table. But these lungs look like they could burst. Would they ever really get this big?
An ordinary breath for a cow is about 1 gallon of air, or 5 liters. But when you take the lungs outside the body and attach this leaf blower, you can inflate them to about 4 times that size.
Now that's some serious lung-busting science that you'll only find in the Hackaverse.
You may have noticed in the clip that they talk about how at the bottom of the trachea, here's the trachea, that it splits into 2 tubes, one for each lung, and those 2 main tubes are called the bronchi. So those bronchi then branch into smaller branches. Those smaller branches are called the bronchioles. This part of the word right here just means little. So it's like little bronchi. And there's hundreds of those in each side of the lung. If you've ever had bronchitis, that's basically what you've had. You've had mucus stuck inside your bronchial tubes, which makes it hard to breathe and hard to talk sometimes. Each one of those little bronchial sacs ends in what are called alveoli, or you can say it alveoli. They are like little sacs inside the lungs. This is what gives the lungs its spongy quality. And each of those little bronchioles, each one of those little alveoli, and they do look like grapes, are surrounded by capillaries. So the purpose here is that you are increasing surface area so that there's lots of space to absorb oxygen. Because as those capillaries surround the alveoli, gas exchange is happening. They are super thin-walled sacs, so oxygen is going into the bloodstream, carbon dioxide gas is going out of the bloodstream, and that's what we would call gas exchange. You also have this very large muscle underneath your heart and lungs called the diaphragm. We don't pronounce the G. That separates basically what's called your chest cavity from your intestines or gut. So it's a dome-shaped muscle here, and it is basically what helps you inhale and exhale. You push this muscle down when you are inhaling, which makes more space for your lungs to expand. And you exhale, when you exhale, that muscle goes back to its resting position, which is that dome-shaped position.
Dear Tim and Moby, why do we breathe? From Min. Hey, you're talking about the respiratory system. We have to breathe to live, but I bet most people don't know exactly why. Your body can store up a lot of the nutrients it needs, but it can't store the one thing that you need all the time. An invisible gas called oxygen. Inside your body, oxygen allows all your cells to make energy so they can function properly. Since you can't store it, your body takes it in all the time in a process called breathing. Breathing is the main function of the respiratory system, which, in complex animals, is responsible for carrying air to the lungs. Here's how it works in humans. Everyone has 2 lungs in their chest. Your lungs are surrounded by your rib cage, and they rest on a dome-shaped muscle called the diaphragm. Every time you take a breath, the diaphragm contracts and moves downward, and your rib cage expands. This causes a drop in air pressure inside your lungs, which the higher pressure air from outside rushes in to equalize. When you inhale, air enters your body through your nose or your mouth. It travels down the trachea or windpipe to your lungs. Inside the lungs, air moves into smaller and smaller passages called bronchial tubes. Eventually, the air spreads to the alveoli. The alveoli are tiny sacs surrounded by blood vessels called capillaries. Oxygen moves through the walls of the alveoli and capillaries and into the blood. Well, the alveoli and capillary walls are only like 1 cell thick, so it's pretty easy. Oh no, there's more. When your lungs take oxygen in, they send carbon dioxide out. Carbon dioxide is a harmful waste gas that you have to get rid of. It's made in your cells and travels through the blood into your heart, which pumps it back into capillaries around your alveoli. Your diaphragm relaxes and moves upward, which deflates your lungs and makes you exhale this used air. And so on. That's breathing. That's pretty close, Moby. Our lungs don't fly around the room or anything, but they do inflate and deflate, just like a balloon. I'd say breathing is pretty important. You want to do all you can to keep your lungs in good working order. Regular exercise helps keep your lungs in shape. And you should steer clear of things that are bad for your lungs, like smoking. Smoking damages your cilia, little hairs inside your bronchial tubes that help remove unwanted matter from the lungs. In the long term, smoking can give you lung cancer and emphysema, a disease that makes it difficult to breathe. Right, and you should avoid air pollution too. And toxic waste. And poisonous gas. I think they get the point.
Many of us have hundreds of things on our minds at any moment, often struggling to keep track of everything we need to do. But fortunately, there's one important thing we don't have to worry about remembering: breathing. When you breathe, you transport oxygen to the body's cells to keep them working, and clear your system of the carbon dioxide that this work generates. Breathing, in other words, keeps the body alive. So how do we accomplish this crucial and complex task without even thinking about it? The answer lies in our body's respiratory system. Like any machinery, it consists of specialized components and requires a trigger to start functioning. Here, the components are the structures and tissues making up the lungs, as well as the various other respiratory organs connected to them. And to get this machine moving, we need the autonomic nervous system, our brain's unconscious control center for the vital functions. As the body prepares to take in oxygen-rich air, this system sends a signal to the muscles around your lungs, flattening the diaphragm and contracting the intercostal muscles between your ribs to create more space for the lungs to expand. Air then whooshes into your nose and mouth, through your trachea, and into the bronchi that split at the trachea's base, with one entering each lung. Like tree branches, these small tubes divide into thousands of tinier passages, called bronchioles. It's tempting to think of the lungs as huge balloons, but instead of being hollow, they're actually spongy inside, with the bronchioles running throughout the parenchyma tissue. At the end of each bronchiole is a little air sac called an alveolus, wrapped in capillaries full of red blood cells containing special proteins called hemoglobin. The air you've breathed in fills these sacs, causing the lungs to inflate. Here is where the vital exchange occurs. At this point, the capillaries are packed with carbon dioxide, and the air sacs are full of oxygen. But due to the basic process of diffusion, the molecules of each gas want to move to a place where there is a lower concentration of their kind. So as oxygen crosses over to the capillaries, the hemoglobin grabs it up, while the carbon dioxide is unloaded into the lungs. The oxygen-rich hemoglobin is then transported throughout the body via the bloodstream. But what do our lungs do with all that carbon dioxide? Exhale it, of course. The autonomic nervous system kicks in again, causing the diaphragm to ball up and the intercostal muscles to relax, making the chest cavity smaller and forcing the lungs to compress. The carbon dioxide-rich air is expelled, and the cycle begins again. So that's how these spongy organs keep our bodies efficiently supplied with air. Lungs inhale and exhale between 15 and 25 times a minute, which amounts to an incredible 10,000 liters of air each day. That's a lot of work, but don't sweat it. Your lungs and your autonomic nervous system have got it covered.